It was meant to be just another peaceful Saturday morning. Birds chirped softly, sprinklers clicked on one after another along the freshly trimmed sidewalks, and the neighborhood group chat was unusually quiet for once. Then Karen made her move, snipping the wrong lock within seconds of cutting through the steel cable securing my Lamborghini. She slid into the driver's seat like she was starring in a low-budget Fast and Furious knockoff. Suddenly, a sharp drone siren blared overhead. She had no idea at that moment, but she'd just triggered a federal protocol typically reserved for terrorist threats or embassy break-ins. Meanwhile, her phone recorded a smug selfie video. From the dashboard came a calm, mechanical voice. "Unauthorized access detected. Federal response deployed." Karen laughed it off until the back panel popped open, revealing a glowing blue tracker. Her seatbelt snapped tight around her, locking her in place. Just like that, she lost control of the car. I watched everything unfold live from my living room, coffee in hand, while a federal response unit was already en route. Karen thought she'd won a petty neighborhood battle, but she had no clue she'd just hijacked a disguised Homeland Security operations vehicle. Our neighborhood was always a weird mix of peaceful and poison. Everyone wore forced smiles while drama bubbled beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. My house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a modern design, clean lines, 3 security cameras hidden in plain sight, and a flashy Lamborghini Huracan usually tucked away in the garage unless it needed a diagnostic check. Karen lived just 3 houses down, a woman who treated HOA enforcement like a full-time job, wielding her power like a mall cop on a mission. She once fined my neighbor over an inflatable dinosaur left in the yard past the holiday hours, and made a scene when someone put their trash bin out just 30 minutes early. Her greatest enemy was anything unconventional, and I was her favorite target. From the day I moved in, Karen had endless questions. What do you do? How can you afford that car? Why are there always trucks outside? Why is your internet satellite linked? I gave her the same answer every time. Yeah, I work in IT. Technically true, but not in the way she imagined. I wasn't about to explain that my Lamborghini was a Homeland Security vehicle, loaded with surveillance tech and customized for discreet urban missions. It was cooling down after a recent operation, parked on my driveway, locked, alarmed, and covered with a heat-resistant tarp. That morning, Karen had already walked her yappy Pomeranian twice. She shot me a side glance when I took the recycling bin in, her lips curling in judgment as usual. I noticed her eye flicked to the half-covered Lambo, clearly irritated something so bold existed in her otherwise dull little kingdom. I shrugged it off. I should have known better. While I went inside to brew coffee, Karen circled back with bolt cutters, clearly thinking she was on some kind of neighborhood justice mission, like a star in her own reality show. I still have the footage from my door camera and the overhead drones. Karen sneaked onto my driveway, peeking around like a cartoon burglar, clipped the high-security lock like it was nothing, tore the cover off with flair, and took a triumphant selfie with the Lamborghini as if she'd just won a prize. Then she slid into the driver's seat. That's when the sensors kicked in. The moment she touched the ignition button, the system detected a non-registered user. Instead of starting the engine, it switched to containment mode. Karen thought the car was just stalling, but actually, it sent me a live video feed, pinged Homeland Security's satellite relay, and launched 2 perimeter drones to keep watch. The doors locked themselves, and the seat adjusted automatically to restrain her upright. A calm but firm voice spoke through the onboard speakers. Attention, unauthorized driver. This vehicle is protected by the United States Department of Homeland Security. Do not attempt to exit. At first, Karen laughed. There's a full Karen chuckle caught on video, like she assumed it was some prank or novelty alarm system. Then the steering wheel locked. The LED lights flashed warnings. Her laughter died. Her phone shook in her hand as she fumbled with the door handle. No luck. The car was fully in lockdown mode. Within 2 minutes, she found herself on the main street, panicked. My custom security setup combined a non-lethal lockdown with high-visibility alerts. The taillights pulsed bright strobes, the horn blasted coded signals, and the 2 drones circled overhead like hunting birds. Karen tried calling for help, but her signal was rerouted to Homeland Security's automated response system. She even screamed out the window, but the doors were sealed tight. I watched all of it from my robe, coffee in hand. Then my phone rang. It was Agent Reyes, his tone calm, almost amused. He asked the usual verification phrase. I gave the code and casually said, "Yeah, Karen finally did it." Reyes chuckled. "We've got eyes on her vehicle. Sending a mobile unit now. Do you want us to intercept her at the intersection or let her stew a bit longer?" Agent Reyes asked. I told him, "Let her stew on just long enough to regret every choice that got her here." Meanwhile, on the street, people were starting to take notice. A few neighbors stepped outside, puzzled. Karen's car was flashing wildly like a rave light show, crawling along at about 5 miles per hour in self-driving mode toward the cul-de-sac exit. A flock of birds scattered as the drones swooped lower. When Karen screamed for help, a kid riding by on a bike actually waved at her, as if it were some TikTok prank. She started yelling about being kidnapped by robots. My security system recorded every moment. The street camera feed caught her initial trespass, the ignition failing to start, her loud screams about HOA rules. It was a comedy show if not for the serious consequences. A Homeland security protocol doesn't mess around with breaches, no matter how petty. Once a lockdown is triggered, everything is logged in a federal database. Karen had gone from being a nosy neighbor to a data breach suspect, and she had no clue. By the time Agent Reyes' black SUV arrived at the intersection, Karen was a mess, red-faced, furious, hair disheveled, kicking the dashboard like it could magically fix things. Reyes stepped out calmly, badge displayed, flanked by 2 uniformed agents. Karen screamed about citizens' rights and HOA permissions, but then the door finally unlocked. She was met with a silence heavier than any shouting, escorted out of the car. She wasn't handcuffed but wasn't free to leave either. Her husband arrived minutes later, jogging up in flip-flops and a bathrobe, completely clueless. The agents waved him off. One of the drones hovered near the Lamborghini, recording the entire debrief. Reyes glanced across the lawn at me and gave a subtle nod. I raised my mug in return. Karen stood in the middle of the street, humiliated, trying to argue her way out of federal custody like it was just a parking ticket. Neighbors quietly filmed on their phones. The HOA president peeked nervously from behind her blinds. The Lamborghini was towed back onto my driveway and parked perfectly by the I-system it housed. The next morning, the neighborhood felt like it had been doused in cold water. No one said it outright, but every glance in my direction came with a stiff, hesitant nod, the kind reserved for people who'd just come back from war or a federal trial. Word had spread faster than I expected, fueled by Karen's live stream clips, which were quickly stitched into dozens of viral TikToks overnight. Headlines didn't help either. Entitled "Woman Tries to Steal Car" turns out to be Homeland Security trap plastered every corner of the internet, but the real storm was just beginning. By mid-morning, a white unmarked van pulled up to Karen's driveway. No logos or decals, just 3 men in civilian clothes stepping out with movements so synchronized they looked rehearsed. The lead man carried himself like someone used to briefing senators. Karen's front door creaked open slowly, as if even the house was embarrassed. She appeared in a half-zipped tracksuit, trying to smile as if she could casually spin a federal interrogation into a simple misunderstanding. I watched the scene unfold from my home office, one screen showing my security feed, the other flashing an incoming call from Agent Reyes. He didn't waste time. Karen's triggered secondary protocols. "We need your clearance for data release." I nodded and gave the go-ahead, authenticating a release token so they could access the Lamborghini's internal logs from the incident, the video, audio, telemetry, all of it. They would use this data to match fingerprints, voice ID, gate access patterns, and determine if she'd accidentally triggered any classified sequences. To her credit, Karen tried. She claimed she thought the car was abandoned and dangerous, and that she was just moving it to keep it safe. That excuse didn't hold up when they asked about the bolt cutters. Then they showed her the drone footage. She froze, her lips moving silently, her face twitching through every stage of panic. Her husband stood nearby, holding a garden hose like it might somehow help. Meanwhile, the HOA chat group exploded. Some demanded Karen resign from the board. Others, loyal to her bizarre suburban reign, defended her. One neighbor asked if this meant Homeland Security was secretly watching all of them. Another replied with a popcorn gif and wrote, "Probably just Karen." I wasn't part of the chat, but a friend next door shared the updates. My neighbor was feeding me the play-by-play. Within the hour, agents escorted Karen to their vehicle, not in handcuffs, but not exactly free either. The official term was voluntary cooperation under federal advisement, which, in Karen's mind, probably sounded like she was politely invited to clear things up. She gave a stiff, awkward wave to the few onlookers, trying to play it cool like this was all routine procedure. A drone circled quietly overhead, circling like a hawk. Once she was gone, Agent Reyes showed up at my place. He let himself in as usual, flashing his ID at the Ring camera like that still meant something after yesterday's fiasco. I met him in the kitchen and handed him a cup of coffee. We settled at the counter and started going through files. He slid a folder across the table. "You might want to read Thizoho's formal response," he said. Inside was a brief 3-paragraph letter from the board. It apologized for the unfortunate misunderstanding caused by a member acting independently, and reassured that the HOA fully respects all federal and local authorities. I almost laughed. Karen had basically gone rogue, wreaking chaos, and now they were acting like she was some random stray raccoon nobody knew. I slid the letter back. "This'll look good in court." Reyes grinned. That evening, everything went nuclear. A local news van parked 2 blocks away and started broadcasting live. Someone had leaked footage of Karen being approached by agents. No surprise, it was already all over the internet. What made it worse was the uncut live stream Karen had taken from inside the Lamborghini. It showed her mocking the car's voice warnings, trying to take selfies mid-panic, and saying out loud, "I bet this loser doesn't even know I took it yet." The internet exploded. Memes flooded social media. Comments ranged from roasting her entitlement to conspiracy theories about whether all Lamborghinis were secret government vehicles. Homeland Security even had to issue a brief statement confirming that certain custom vehicles were occasionally used in field operations and remained agency property even when off-duty. They didn't name her, but they didn't have to. I thought the chaos might die down there, but then Karen's husband made it worse. He went on TV holding a printed HOA handbook and claimed the whole thing was blown out of proportion. He insisted his wife believed the vehicle was a neighborhood threat and that she had previously reported suspicious activity at my address. When pressed about the suspicious activity, he said I had unusual garage equipment and weird antennas. The anchor paused before asking if he knew I worked with the federal government. His face twisted. "That's classified," he replied, making it even more ridiculous. The clip aired nationally. Within hours, it was playing on morning radio shows, trending on Twitter, and my front yard was swarming with curious onlookers. The icing on the cake came late at night when a new drone arrived, definitely not part of my setup. It was a federal model, dispatched straight from HQ. It landed silently on my roof and deployed a wide-angle panoramic scan of the neighborhood. Reyes texted me simply, "Additional surveillance, temporary, not for you." It was clear now, Homeland had escalated this from an isolated incident to a potential security exposure. Not because Karen was a threat herself, but because she had unwittingly exposed a glaring weakness in the agency's low-profile asset placement system. If someone like her could casually approach and partially access a field-ready vehicle, what could a real infiltrator do? That's when everything shifted. I wasn't just a homeowner with a tech background anymore. I'd become a variable in a national security equation. And Karen? She became a textbook example of how ignorance and entitlement can set off a federal chain reaction. The neighborhood started to split. Half the residents were furious at the unwanted attention, blaming Karen. The other half were buzzing with gossip, treating it like the juiciest drama their street had seen in years. The HOA board sent out a letter postponing all community events until further notice. The HOA sent out a formal notice postponing all community events and announced an emergency meeting to address public conduct violations. 3 days passed, but the shockwave Karen unleashed kept spreading like ripples across a storm-fed lake. At first, I thought the worst was behind us. Karen had been publicly humiliated, federal authorities had intervened, and the neighborhood's fragile illusion of peace was shattered. But that was just the beginning. The deeper consequences were only starting to surface. What Karina and most of the neighborhood didn't realize was that my car wasn't just a flashy ride with hidden gadgets. It was part of a classified operation code named Operation Falcon Echo. By messing with it, She'd inadvertently woven herself into an active operational record. That's when things got truly complicated, and not just for her, but for me too. The story behind the car went far beyond the usual assumptions. Most people thought I was just working remote tech jobs. The truth was, after a few years in private cybersecurity, I'd been quietly recruited by Homeland Security's Adaptive Field Response Division. They were building a fleet of mobile surveillance assets disguised as high-end civilian vehicles, equipped with classified hardware, encrypted uplinks, and AI-driven threat diagnostics. These cars weren't just tools, they were decoys designed to lure and track espionage activities in places nobody would suspect, including clean-cut suburbs like this one. My Lamborghini had traveled through 8 countries before it ever rolled into my driveway. It had been involved in 2 covert busts and had successfully deflected a serious cyber attack plot involving foreign agents. Karen treated it like a status symbol, but in reality, it had more built-in countermeasures than the entire local police fleet. So when Ray's returned for a follow-up meeting, at this time accompanied by 2 analysts from the operations division, the mood was different. No smiles, no coffee. They laid out files, reports, timestamps, footage, and satellite images. Every step Karen took, every angle of her face, every word she muttered inside the car, everything was digitally isolated, voice printed, and cross-checked against federal records. They weren't looking to punish her. They were assessing risk. Was she just an entitled woman who got too nosy, or was there something more beneath the surface? I vouched for her, telling them she was exactly what she seemed: self-important, careless, and nosy to an absurd degree, but not dangerous. They didn't argue, but they made one thing clear: because of the breach, I was now personally responsible for any fallout in the neighborhood. The car would remain under lockdown, scheduled for extraction and reinstallation. Until then, I was to maintain strict control of all footage and ensure no data leaked it to the press, curious neighbors, or even as jokes. What made it surreal was how completely Karen misunderstood the whole situation. After her brief release from questioning, she came back to the neighborhood acting like she'd narrowly escaped injustice. She even held a backyard support gathering, inviting only those she deemed real neighbors, spinning her version of events. According to her, the government had overreacted. She claimed she was trying to protect the community. The car had no visible license plate, so it must have been suspicious. She even hinted that I might be using the vehicle to spy on her. Her husband nodded along the entire time, clutching a cheap glass of wine like it was a lifeline. Unfortunately for Karen, not everyone bought her story. The neighbors who once feared her now felt betrayed. She'd always portrayed herself as the ho's moral compass, but now she looked like a fool who nearly invited a federal lawsuit onto their street. At one point during her little party, a resident called her out, asking how bolt cutters fit into her story. Karen smiled thinly. "I keep them on hand for emergencies," she said. The man just rolled his eyes and walked away. The deeper irony? While Karen spun her tales, she had no idea that Homeland had already reviewed her entire history with me in exhaustive detail. They had access to my footage archive going back months. They saw how she trespassed twice before under the pretense of measuring property lines. They watched her peering through my windows with binoculars and noted how she'd photographed my mail. She wasn't just nosy, she was borderline obsessive. One analyst even suggested she might have been trying to build a case against me, possibly on behalf of the HOA. She had Karen had even filed 2 complaints about me, claiming I had suspicious antennas and unlicensed satellite dishes. In reality, these were just high-frequency receivers, fully compliant with regulations and legally protected under my security clearance. One of the strangest discoveries was an old HOA complaint Karen had filed nearly a year earlier. She accused me of harboring illegally modified equipment and demanded a full community audit. Her request was dismissed without ceremony, but it made one thing clear: Karen had been targeting me long before the Lamborghini ever showed up. Her obsession wasn't new. This incident was simply the breaking point. The analysts described it as a patterned escalation, textbook behavior for someone who feels they're losing control of their environment. And Karen, despite her outward confidence, was panicking on the inside the moment she realized she wasn't in charge. The fallout kept spreading. Homeland Security issued a formal notice to local authorities explaining the vehicle's classified nature, the breach, and the neighborhood's new status as a monitored site. No names were mentioned publicly, but anyone paying attention knew exactly which neighborhood it was. Local news ran blurred footage of the car, referring to it as a suspicious Homeland vehicle now under security review. Karen saw the report and, shockingly, doubled down. She called into a local radio station, claiming she was being harassed and that someone had planted a government car near her home to intimidate her. Her voice trembled, but her words were aggressive. She insisted the truth would come out, and the neighborhood needed protection from surveillance. The host didn't take her seriously, cutting her off mid-rant and playing music over her, but the damage was done. The next morning, I found a crumpled pamphlet on my lawn, homemade, titled Neighborhood Watch Against Unauthorized Surveillance. On the back was a phone number and a handwritten note, call to report suspicious antennas. I laughed. Karen had officially gone rogue. Not only was she spinning conspiracy theories, but she was now starting her own resistance group against me, against Homeland, and against a car she fancied she could commandeer like it was hers by right. I didn't report the pamphlet. I didn't have to. One of the federal analysts was still living undercover on our block, and I knew he'd already picked one up. Ray's confirmed it with a quick text an hour later. Got it. She's making this easier. A strange calm settled over me, the kind you only feel when you know something big is brewing but you're not the one who'll suffer for it. Karen had crossed lines she didn't even realize existed. She'd treated a federal operation like a personal vendetta. And while she paced inside, writing fake newsletters and planning her next paranoid backyard meeting, she had no clue her name was still circulating in Homeland's internal memos. The fourth day after the incident began ended as strangely as the other, so with confusion hanging thick in the air and tension lurking beneath every polite smile. The neighborhood no longer felt like the peaceful, tightly regulated haven it once pretended to be. It had become a suburban military base, except instead of soldiers, there were gossiping retirees and curious teenagers peeking through curtains. The real shift came that morning when the HOA president sent an emergency email calling for a community-wide meeting to discuss neighborhood concerns. Karen wasn't named, but everyone knew who it was about. A no decoder ring required. From my porch, I watched neighbors walk by, pretending not to glance at my house. The Lamborghini was gone, taken overnight by the Homeland extraction team, loaded onto an enclosed trailer bound for reprogramming and forensic analysis. No tire tracks, no signs it had ever been there, but its absence was louder than its presence. The disappearance sent a clear message to the neighborhood. This wasn't just a flashy car being towed away, it was the government removing a critical asset. Karen, however, didn't seem to grasp the finality of it all. Around noon, she appeared again, full force, strutting toward the community park with her clipboard and a fake smile plastered across her face. She wore oversized sunglasses and a sun hat as if shielding herself from paparazzi. She greeted everyone loudly, acting like the last 4 days never happened, and as if the news vans, federal questioning, and public humiliation hadn't left permanent marks. But people no longer responded the way they used to. Her usual minions were nowhere to be found. A few neighbors nodded politely, then quickly moved on. The woman who once controlled the neighborhood's tone now wandered among people who barely made eye contact. That afternoon, I got another call from Ray's. His tone was different this time, firmer. He told me they had completed a full Ray's called me that afternoon with an update. After reviewing Karen's online activity, they'd flagged several patterns that needed further legal scrutiny. She had been spreading misinformation about the agency, accusing federal agents of illegal surveillance, and had even posted in 3 separate community forums, claiming I was some kind of embedded intelligence officer spying on civilians. Ray's said the agency wasn't planning to pursue defamation charges, it wasn't worth the effort, but the FBI had taken notice of one thing Karen said during her live stream and repeated during her radio call-in, that she knew the car's true function before she took it. That claim changed everything. It suggested intent. If she had suspected it was federal property and still tried to tamper with or move it, that wasn't ignorance anymore. That could be seen as willful interference with a federal asset. I asked Ray's if charges were coming. He didn't confirm or deny, only said the legal review had been escalated. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor now, she was potentially being investigated for obstructing an active intelligence operation. That evening, the emergency home meeting was held at the community clubhouse. The tension was thick, every seat was filled, and some people stood against the walls. Karen showed up in her usual pastel power suit, taking a front row seat like she owned the place. The HOA board looked exhausted, their smiles felt forced. They opened the meeting with vague statements about unity and the need to move forward together. Then a younger resident stood up and asked bluntly why someone who had triggered a federal investigation was still allowed on the HOA board. There was a pause, murmurs, and then another resident echoed the question. Karen stood, interrupting, insisting everything was overblown, that she'd been misled and acted only out of concern. She claimed the government was overreacting and even threw in bizarre conspiracy theories about federal vehicles planted to monitor HOA elections. Some people snickered, a few looked worried, but no one agreed with her. Then a retired Navy officer from down the street calmly stood and stated that Karen had trespassed, caused property damage, and put the entire community at risk by interfering with federal operations. He reminded everyone that even civilians have responsibilities, and recklessness can have serious consequences, even when it begins with curiosity. That moment shattered whatever illusion Karen had left. Her eyes darted nervously around the room. Her husband, seated at the back, avoided eye contact and stared at the floor. No one defended her, not a single person. Finally, the HOA president cleared her throat and announced that, due to recent events, the board would vote to suspend Karen's seat pending further investigation. There was no argument. Karen sat down slowly, her face frozen, lips trembling slightly. I didn't speak at the meeting, I didn't need to. The room had spoken for me. The next morning, things got stranger. A legal notice was taped to Karen's front door. She tore it down before anyone could read it, but rumors spread quickly. Some said it was a cease and desist from the Department of Justice, warning her to stop sharing classified information online. Others said it was a civil notice about potential liability. I didn't know which was true, but Ray's called shortly afterward and said simply, "The situation is transitioning. She'll be receiving a formal visit soon." That same day, security footage from my rooftop system, previously classified and now partially redacted, was quietly cleared for limited public release. Homeland had decided to leak it in a controlled way to squash misinformation. The footage showed Karen cutting the lock, ripping off the cover, sitting inside the vehicle, and activating the protocol. The moment the Lamborghini announced federal ownership was unmistakable. The internet went wild. Clips went viral with titles like "Karen's deals government spy car" and "Woman triggers drone response thinking she's entitled to a Lamborghini." Public sentiment was brutal. Memes flooded every corner of the internet. People started calling her Spy Hunter Karen. A parody video even recreated the scene using action figures. Meanwhile, Karen locked herself inside her house and didn't come out for 2 days. I used that time to clean up. I reviewed my own systems, updated firewalls, removed backdoors from local servers, and finalized the report Homeland had requested on the Lamborghini's iThreat protocol. Embarrassing as the incident was on the surface, it actually proved the tech's effectiveness. Civilian interference had triggered the system and it responded exactly as designed. Containment, live feed, non-lethal lockout, and facial recognition all operated perfectly within safety margins. From a performance standpoint, the incident was a win. And yet something didn't sit right. Karen had crossed a line none of us imagined she would. Even after humiliation, suspension, investigation, and public disgrace, there was still a feeling in the air that she wasn't done. That somewhere inside her house, she was planning something. The next morning arrived wrapped in silence, not peace, but the tense calm before a storm. Ray's showed up just after sunrise, stepping out of a black sedan that didn't belong to him. The man who followed behind him was unfamiliar, tall, sharply dressed, and carrying an arrow. If they didn't greet me at the door, without a word, they walked through the gate, nodded after a quick scan, and made their way into my kitchen like it was their office. I closed the door behind them, already sensing this wasn't going to be a routine update. It felt final. Ray's placed a tablet on the counter, spinning it toward me. The screen displayed a string of emails sent by Karina to local media, bloggers, and an anti-surveillance conspiracy website. She had been weaving a story linking me to a federal surveillance operation targeting civilians. She claimed Homeland Security had planted me in the neighborhood to spy on residents. Her messages included fabricated files, alleged photographic proof, and cited obscure government regulations as if she'd uncovered some secret no one else knew. I stared at the screen, realizing this had crossed from paranoid ranting into dangerous territory. Karen was deliberately trying to stir up misinformation and outrage. The man in the suit introduced himself as Agent Mark. He explained that while Homeland had no intention of fueling a public spectacle, the Department of Justice viewed Karen's campaign as a reputational threat and a potential national security risk. This wasn't about me anymore, it was about what chaos her story could unleash if believed and acted upon. It only takes one unhinged person, Mark said quietly, to show up with bad intentions, thinking they're stopping some imaginary threat. They laid out their plan: no arrest, no public confrontation, just precise legal action. A civil lawsuit, not criminal, would be filed under a rarely used federal clause against reckless civilian interference with secure operations. Karen would be served quietly. A formal notice would go to her lawyer. All footage and communication records would be sealed. The viral clips had already done enough damage. Her credibility was gone. She was being given a final chance to walk away quietly. If she refused, criminal charges would follow. Ray stood and added something I hadn't expected: "You were too kind." Most would have pressed charges on day one. I said nothing. Maybe I was too kind, hoping she'd embarrass herself so thoroughly that she'd disappear. I had underestimated her capacity to spiral. The agents left without fanfare. Just like that, it was over, or so I thought. That weekend, the neighborhood was eerily quiet. No joggers, no dog walkers, no HOA clipboard patrols. Karen's house remained dark, her car untouched for days, curtains drawn tight. Rumors swirled. Some said she'd left town, others that she was plotting a comeback. I didn't care anymore. I'd submitted my final report. The car was gone. Homeland had pulled surveillance from the street, and I was preparing to move on. But there was one last thing I wanted to do. For months, I had quietly been buying up property on the edge of the community. Most thought it was for storage or expansion, but the plot included the office building leased by the HOA. The private real estate group who owned it had no problem selling, especially since the board had been behind on payments, thanks largely to the legal chaos Karen stirred up. I purchased it through a shell corporation under a separate trust, and the paperwork was completed within a week. No one expected it. That Monday, I walked into the HOA office carrying a simple letter and a box. The president, worn down by weeks of turmoil, sat behind the desk. I placed the envelope in front of her. She opened it slowly, eyes widening as she read the notice. Effective immediately, the HOA had 90 days to vacate or renegotiate under new ownership. Her face went pale. She asked who owned the property. I gave her the trust's name. Then I pushed the box forward. Inside were Karen's fake newsletters, a flash drive with video footage, and printouts of her emails to the media. I told her, "This is everything I've kept quiet about. I have no desire to destroy the community, but if Karen tries anything else, I will release the full report without blurring any names." I left without another word. A week later, the HOA board held an emergency vote. Karen was permanently removed from all positions, her privileges revoked, her access to documents suspended, and her name erased from upcoming ballots. She didn't show up to contest not once. She vanished from public view, like someone who finally realized she was no longer the main character. To close the chapter, I hosted a barbecue in the park open to everyone. No HOA agenda, no rules, just food and music. A big sign read, "Open to all neighbors except one." People laughed, brought lawn chairs, kids played near the fountain, and someone even baked a cake shaped like a Lamborghini. For the first time in weeks, the community felt like it could breathe again. Midway through the event, a sleek black vehicle rolled quietly to the crib of the Lambo, fresh from the lab but with a new paint job, different rims, new tags, and most importantly, a decal on the passenger door reading, "Demonstration Unit Inactive," in small block letters. It wasn't functional anymore, but it was still mine. Kids ran over to take pictures, Adults posed next to it jokingly. One neighbor laughed and asked if it still had lasers. I smiled and said, "No, just fireworks." Across the street, I caught sight of Karen standing behind her curtain. She thought no one could see her, but the light hit just right, revealing her watching a party she wasn't invited to, watching the car she had tried to steal, watching a neighborhood that had moved on without her. The curtain twitched and then fell still. As the sun set, people packed up their chairs, kids said their goodbyes, and families returned home. I stood beside the car, arms folded, soaking in the quiet. My phone buzzed with a final message from Ray's. "She's officially flagged. No longer your problem." I didn't reply. The message said everything. I climbed into the car and closed the door. The engine started with a soft hum, but I didn't drive. I just sat there, staring through the windshield at a neighborhood that had finally found its balance again. Karen may have thought she could break locks, boundaries, and rule less, but she never understood that some locks aren't just metal and chains. Some are built from layers of protocol, law, and consequences. And when you cut through those, you don't just open and you unleash something that never closes.